Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Von Manor, where it's Wednesday. That means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, I'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donahue over on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week, and this week we're talking about one of my very favorite comic books, which was Hawkman. Hawkman, as written by Gardner Fox and illustrated by the great Joe Kubert. So, Hawkman. So, this was one of the characters that DC resurrected. Hawkman was originally a Golden Age hero, also written by Gardner Fox. But they brought Gardner Fox back because of the great success that The Flash had when he was brought back, and Green Lantern had when he was brought back. So why not bring back Hawkman? And I'm glad they did, because Hawkman is an awesome character. So DC Comics in the early 60s, 1964, brought back Hawkman. And Hawkgirl, actually. There's Hawkgirl. This is one of my favorite DC comic books of all, Hawkman. I love this character, actually, as he was presented in these early stories. Now, Hawkman is not a character that DC Comics has been particularly kind to. His backstory has become enormously convoluted and confused, so that now it's like you need to be a scientist to understand what the hell is going on with Hawkman's history. But originally, the Silver Age Hawkman had a fairly simple backstory, like most superheroes did. Now, Hawkman originally was very different in the Golden Age. He had a completely different origin. But this Hawkman, the Silver Age Hawkman, when he was brought back as kind of a science fiction hero. Hawkman and Hawkwoman, or Hawkgirl as she was known back in those days, were aliens. You see, Hawkman and Hawkgirl were police officers from another planet who dressed like birds. Which sounds ridiculous when you just say it like that, but yeah, they were police officers from the planet Thanagar, and they dressed like birds. Because, that's just how police officers dress on Thanagar. They dress like birds. It's a normal thing. And it was fantastic. So, another way that DC has been unkind to Hawkman and these original Hawkman stories is that they barely have reprinted them over the years. This edition, this is a color edition of the original stories from Joe Kubert and Gardner Fox, and it's fabulous. But this edition came out in 1989. And the only paperback edition of these stories since has been this Showcase Presents volume, which is 500 pages, and so that's awesome. But it is all in black and white. So if you're not down with that, you might not care for it. That's how these Showcase Presents volumes were. They were a ripoff of Marvel's Essential volumes, which were also cheap black and white reprints. And I love them, but, they are cheap. So what we really need is a Silver Age Hawkman omnibus, which DC Comics stubbornly refuses to print. However, they do seem to be getting their act together a little bit, DC Comics. And so they're coming out with their new line, DC Finest, where they're reprinting a bunch of cool old stuff. So hopefully at some point, they'll reprint these early issues of Hawkman, because they were great. I mean, they were just great. Of course, like any Silver Age DC comic, they have their strengths and their weaknesses. Now, unfortunately, this volume, it's like a lot of the older reprint volumes that DC Comics produced, in that it doesn't have covers to the stories. They just print the stories that were in the comics, but they don't give you the covers. Now, the art is fantastic by Joe Kubert, and that is one of the main reasons to read this comic book. is Joe Kubert's amazing art. Joe Kubert was such a great artist. He was amazing on DC Comics version of Tarzan. That is probably, that could be the best stuff he ever did. Although Sergeant Rock comes close. He was probably the greatest artist of war comics, in my opinion. And that's saying something when you consider so many great artists who did war comic books. But Joe Kubert was just amazing. And his Sergeant Rock comics were just fantastic. But man, he was good on Hawkman. Now, he wasn't the type of artist you'd think would be great on traditional superheroes, but Hawkman was kind of a unique superhero in that this was very much a superhero's comic strip, but the characters themselves have a very unique look, and they tended to use old-style Earth weapons because they just thought it was cool to do that. And, who draws those better than Joe Kubert? Nobody. So it was kind of cool. Now, like I said, they do have strengths and weaknesses, these comic books. Gardner Fox was writing these, and Gardner Fox was a guy who wrote 1 million comic books. He wrote 1 million comic books. He was also, an author of regular novels like this masterpiece, The Hunter Out of Time from Gardner F. Fox, which I will be reading in July, actually. Gardner Fox wrote a lot of paperbacks as well. He just produced a ton of stuff. But you'll notice something about his comic book work in that they're very strong when it comes to plot. The plot was everything in his comic books. Characterization, not so much. Personality, not so much. That was a weakness of a lot of early DC Comics characters. Now, my partner on Epic Comic Book Wednesday will tell you that that's a good thing. Inexplicably, he will tell you it's good that a lot of these superheroes in DC Comics didn't have strong personalities. Every other reader of comic books ever will pretty much tell you that it's a weakness, actually. And it is, which is one of the reasons Marvel was such a tremendous success. Their characters actually had personalities. But Gardner Fox was really strong when it came to plots and intricate plots sometimes and action. His comic book stories moved and a lot of cool stuff happened. He was very into science fiction, and so a lot of his comic books have a very science fiction-y feel, full of science fiction stuff. And certainly Hawkman is no exception. Hawkman, who traveled from outer space with Hawkgirl. Now, another interesting thing about this comic book is that Hawkman and Hawkgirl, Cater Hall, and I can never pronounce Hawkgirl's name. Was it Shara? Shara? I can't remember. But yeah, they're married, which is interesting. Now, certain comic book editors hate for superheroes to be married because they think that makes them somehow less interesting, which is stupid. One of the cool things about this was that you did have 2 police officers from outer space. They were professionals. They were married, and they worked very well together. And it was cool. Of course, DC Comics eventually had to break up Hawkman and Hawkgirl because you can't have people being happily married or together, so let's break them up. But when they were together, they were an awesome team. And one thing that these early DC Comics, like this, like I said, came out in 1964, and one thing that this had, I think, that beat Marvel, definitely when Stan Lee wrote the book, was the presentation of the female characters. For some reason, Stan Lee couldn't create a strong female character to save his life. He had that period sexism, I think, ingrained in him, so that all of his female characters were kind of weak. You know, Sue Storm, oh Reed, oh Reed. And even Lady Sif in Thor, who was a warrior, you know, this Asgardian warrior, was like, oh, Thor, does Thor love me? I would do anything for Thor. And just, you know, you had that going on. Whereas you didn't have that with Hawkgirl. Hawkgirl was a professional who knew her business and was not ever whining, you know. True, I mean, this is from 1964, and Hawkman was very much the senior partner. But yeah, Hawkgirl was a great character, and she didn't have any of that whininess going on. She, you know, you didn't want to mess with Hawkgirl. She was a superhero up there with Hawkman, and the artwork, like I said, is just fantastic. It's just fantastic. I mean, this was just a comic book that Joe Kubert was just so great at illustrating. Unfortunately, he didn't stay with Hawkman for too long. I think he was replaced by who? Murphy Anderson and some others. But, you know, they did a good job too. All of these original Hawkman stories were pretty great, and the art was just wonderful. So when Hawkman first showed up, they were trailing this alien who can shapeshift. He's an alien who can shapeshift. And the story starts out, the beginning of this Hawkman series starts out with this alien on Earth. And we have this limping dog walking along the road, and this kind fellow stops by and said, "Oh man, that dog's hurt. I got to take him to the vet because he's like a nice guy." And the alien turns into a bear and just knocks him across the head and knocks him out and steals his suitcase so he could have clothes when he turns into a human being. So we know he's super evil right away. And so we have these police officers from Thanagar trailing him, and their police officer gear, you know, are these wings because they have anti-gravity belts because they could fly. That's their whole thing. So since they're going to Earth as police officers, they decide to contact the police commissioner. And they have this great conversation. "We've trailed a dangerous criminal named Biff." His name is Biff. Sorry, I didn't put my glasses on. I probably should do that. "From our planet to yours. He has the strange power to alter his shape, to duplicate another man, bird, or animal." So they're saying all this to the police commissioner while dressed as birds. Fantastic as this all sounds, I'm convinced you're speaking the truth. Come in, please. And he just, why? Why is he convinced that they're speaking the truth? How would you believe people if they just showed up at your doorstep wearing wings and bird helmets and just said, "Hey, we're from space. We're police officers from space, and we're trailing this guy who can transform into other beings. Can you help us?" "Sure, come on in. Yeah, no problem." Why does he believe them? He needs to, for the plot. Gardner Fox won't let anything slow the plot down. So, yeah, their first adventure is where they're dealing with this shape-shifting criminal who can not only turn into any animal on Earth, but any animal he's ever encountered, including, you know, dinosaur-like creatures. And while they're trailing this guy, they're having a hard time catching him because he's a pretty tough villain. The police officer says, "Well, you got to do something while you're here on Earth. You know, my brother-in-law, he's the curator of the museum, and he's retiring. I'll just get you that job." And Hawkman's like, "Sure, I'll take that job." So conveniently, Hawkman immediately gets a job from the police commissioner, who's the most trusting police commissioner in the world. People dressed like birds show up and say they're police officers from space. "Sure, I believe you. In fact, I got a job for you." So they're undercover, working at the museum, all the while trying to catch this shape-shifting alien. They eventually do, after we have this fantastic scene where Biff transforms into a crazy dragon creature, which Kubert illustrates just magnificently. It's just so awesome. And they conquer the dragon creature, you know, when he's in his dragon form. They beat him, of course. And then they just stay on at the museum because they decide to stay on the planet Earth because they want to study Earth methods of law enforcement. You know, they're already here. And so they're like, you know, we'll just stay here and learn your police methods. And, you know, whatever works, we'll take back to Thanagar with us. Only they never go back. Actually, they do. They do go back, but not to stay. But it was just an incredibly fun comic book with these wonderful plots, this fantastic artwork from Joe Kubert. I mean, the attraction to these stories was not just the art, but the stories themselves were just so fun and interesting, and you really want to find out what happens next. They were great fun. And Hawkman and Hawkgirl, you know, are always flying around using, like I said, they decide, you know, they use maces and spears and flails and whatever other kind of old weapon they could find in the museum just to see how it works. Let's just take this and see how this works against this villain. So that was awesome. It was a great series. Sadly under-reprinted, though. So, yeah, the first few issues you can get digitally, I think, but you have to get them as individual issues because there is no collection in print, I think, of these original Hawkman stories. I think this was the last one that was reprinted, and this is out of print by now. You can get it pretty easily, probably on eBay. But I think this Showcase Presents volume was the last time DC Comics reprinted this stuff. So they're overdue. They're overdue to be reprinted. So I'm hoping DC Comics comes to their senses and reprints this stuff, either in an omnibus, that would be what I would prefer, I think, or in their DC Finest paperback volumes. That would be great, because otherwise, you know, you have an archive edition that came out, I think, in 1990 or 91. You have this that came out in 89, and this that came out in what year? What year did you come out? I can't even see it because I'm not wearing my glasses. I probably should have put those on. But it was, you know, it was a number of years ago that this came out. So yeah, DC Comics put out Hawkman again. That was awesome. I will catch you next time.